In this tutorial, I'm going to show you some UV mapping basics. So here I have a blank scene. I'm just going to double check to make sure that my render setup is currently set to renderer, scanline renderer. That's going to be important because we're going to be working with materials today. So let's go ahead and do rendering, material editor, slate material editor. It's going to pop up in our material editor. We want to find, most likely yours will look like this, all right? And scanline will be collapsed. You're going to want to expand that and find standard legacy, and you're going to drag that in. Now, next, you want to bring in image file. So what I've done is I've provided this texture called fancybox_D. So you're just going to take that image, and you're going to drag that here into the material editor. That sets that up as a bitmap. I double click on it to make it larger. Right? And so this image has 6 different pictures on it. We're going to UV unwrap our box so that all 6 of these images unwrap onto the box itself. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to drag out this line and plug it in. That means this image is now being applied to the diffuse color of this material, which I just double clicked on to make the material sphere larger. I'm going to call this fancy_box. Oops, let's fix that spelling. Fancy box. All right. Next, let's go ahead and move this over to the side. I'm going to click in my perspective window to make it active and go to box. And now in keyboard entry, I'm going to enter values of 100 for length, width, and height. I'm just using tab on my keyboard to move between the different inputs, and now I hit create. I right click to get out of that and hit Z to zoom in on it. So now my box is selected. My material editor is over here. I'm going to right click on this material and say assign material to selection. You're going to want to make sure that you right click again and just say show realistic material in viewport. So now we have this box. So let's click here on the little plus sign and say maximize viewport. Control R to orbit around. All right. So when you make an object like a box, I've clicked on modify and you can see the base parameters. There's a checkbox to generate mapping coordinates. That is on by default. If you turn that off, you don't have UVs. Now it's generating mapping coordinates. So now you can see my texture. You see that the default, if I click on orbit here, the default is just to project your image onto every surface 1 to 1. All right. So right click and convert that at poly. All right. So now from here, I'm going to go ahead and click on default shading, turn on edge faces. I want to apply Unwrap UVW. So at this point, if you have not gone through the tutorial for setting up modifier sets, please do that now. That way the UV unwrapping modifiers are going to be there, easy for you to access. You certainly can click on the modifier list to find them. It'll just go quicker if you actually have these set up. So I'm going to click Unwrap UVW. And it'll also help if you hover over the edge and give yourself 2 columns here so that you can see all of this information. So I'm going to click on the little arrow down. It is important to note at this time that my Unwrap UVW, when you look at it here, does not have any icon next to it. That means that it is applied to the top level of editable poly. If you have anything selected, right? So if I come down here, and if I'm in Polygon and I put Unwrap UVW on, when I go to Unwrap UVW, there will be nothing here. And you will know that's the case because you will see next to Unwrap UVW that there will be a icon for one of the sub-objects for editable poly. So what I'm going to do is come down here to editable poly. I'm going to say yes, right? And I'm going to click on the word editable poly to get out of the sub-object. And now go back up to Unwrap UVW. And so now when I go to Edit UVs and click Open UV Editor, you see that now there's polygons in the window. All right. So let's minimize this for the moment. I'm going to expand here. Unwrap UVW has 3 different sub-objects, vertex, edge, and polygon. And you can see as I click on them here in selection, they show up there as well. If I click on one polygon, there are grow and shrink buttons. There's also, if you're an edge, there is ring and loop buttons. Those won't be of any use to a box like this because all of these edges terminate at an intersection of 3 edges as opposed to 4. By default, ignore backface is on, so if I go into polygon and region select, and it looks like you got everything right, but when you orbit around, it didn't get the backside. It's actually, if you want to turn that off, that is right here, and then you can select everything. Although when you're UV unwrapping, it's usually very useful to have ignore backface on so you don't accidentally select polygons to the other side. If I click, I can get one polygon. If I click select by element and click, it'll select that entire element. That can be very useful as well. So at this point, I'm just going to click in negative space. There's a rollout called Edit UVs. Inside Edit UVs is Open UV Editor, which I clicked on, and that brought up my Edit UV window. Now in here, there's all sorts of tools that you can use. If I click and drag this over, it has this default selection that comes on. It kind of drives me crazy. I like to come up here to Options Preferences and turn off Selection Preview. You can keep that on if you want. I kind of hate it. Bugs me like nobody's business. So yeah, it gets really in the way. So I like to turn it off. You can feel free to keep it on though. I'm not going to judge you. So I'm going to come up here and I want to be able to see my texture. So I believe if I come down here, interesting, this shows, usually you click all IDs, it'll show you all IDs. I think that's because each surface of this polygon has a different material ID assigned to it. But what we've done is assign one material, and so the same material shows up everywhere. It's just showing up as 6 different assignments. So we'll ignore that. I'm going to come up here where it says checker pat. That's checker pattern. If I click map 1, my texture should show up. All right. If your texture does not show up when you do that, you can click pick texture, and if it's inside the scene in this list, you should be able to select it, and then it will show up inside the viewport. If it's not showing up, if either one of those doesn't work, contact me and I will help you out. If you click on this guy here, this is shows active map in dialog. You can toggle that on and off. All right, so right now if I click, I have this polygon selected. What I want to do is I want to take this polygon and I want to move it. I can just grab this little corner here. I want to move this so that I get just one face on there, but I want to start with the top. And what I'm going to do is give myself some basic UVs. And to do that, I'm going to click here in negative space. Negative space meaning anywhere my polygons are not. I want to have nothing currently selected other than Unwrap UVW polygon. Now I'm going to come up here to my menu and say Mapping, Flatten Mapping, and click OK. And what that does is it takes every single polygon and lays it out flat and unique. Right? Now, that's not how you start every project. This is a very, very simple cube, and it's an easy way to get some basic UVs for it. Most objects you're going to make are far too complex to actually utilize that on the entire object, maybe for some small portions of it. But in our case, it's going to help us out because we're really just making a fancy dice here. So I'm going to click up here and rotate. So I want to select the top of the box. If you're not sure, you can go out to the full scene, come over here to top and just click, and then you'll know you have the top selected. And now I can move this around. If these other boxes are in the way, just region select them and move them out of the way. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to move this over, and what I'm on now is freeform. So I can grab the corner and just move this in. All right, so now I have the number 1. It's assigned to the top of the box. What I want to do next is you'll notice there's this little vine. So follow the vine. That's going to come down here. And so I clicked inside the viewport because I want to make sure I'm actually grabbing the proper polygon, because visually I want the vine to come down and wrap around my cube here. So if I orbit around to the side, I just want to click on the next one, and we'll move this one over. Same thing. Take that, move that over, and we'll just keep working our way around. And so I'm selecting, you certainly can select inside the UV editor window. The trick with that though is you're gonna have to double check to make sure you're getting the right one. And in our case, since this is just a texture where this vine comes in and wraps its way around, it's a lot easier to select them here in our 3D viewport. Move this over, bring it in. So some of you may have concerns as you're working on this that things aren't lining up perfectly. Get all the pieces roughly in position, right? And so let's orbit around. Let's take a look at the bottom. So here we run into just a little bit of trouble. I'm going to hit F2 to turn off the shaded toggle so you can see it better. See how the vine comes down? We kind of want it to line up right here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this guy and rotate him. And so we can rotate it manually. That works perfectly fine. I'm going to undo that. There's other options here. There's quick transforms. If I click on those, that'll rotate it. You saw it rotate here. You won't see it in the viewport though until you click to make it active, which is, I feel like that's a bug, but they refuse to fix it, so it's an odd one. But yeah, these quick transforms will allow you to do a quick rotate. So when you're all done, if you want to make sure everything lines up perfectly, you can come in, and I've switched to vertex here. I'm just going to region select, and under quick transform there's also these aligns. There's align horizontal, so I can click to align those, and then align these. I could grab here, actually let's grab that entire line, and now I'm going to align vertically. And what it's doing is it takes the average and it aligns them to the average. So yep. I'm very careful when I do this that I only get one row, because if you align, say I align horizontal here, see how it just collapses them all together? You certainly don't want that. Okay. So yeah, you could just watch how you're doing it as you go along. And that's pretty much it. That's the process for going through and doing this. You'll see this guy, the 6, he's kind of overlapping a little bit. I think maybe what I need to do here is grab these vertex points and just move them over a little bit. There we go. Because what you see is when I created this texture, when it got to the edge of the polygon, it just took that pixel and just did what it calls bleed. And so it takes that and drags it out like that. That's something to help with games. If you have to, when you first load in a level, you may see blurry textures. Those are what are called bitmaps or LOD textures. And when that takes your texture, makes it smaller. And so having bleed like this actually reduces you seeing what's called seam bleed, where you actually see your texture kind of bleeding through whatever the background may be. What's great is this is automatically generated. That's not something I had to do. So there we go. There's my cube. I'm going to right click on it and say convert to edit poly, because I want to make those UVs permanent. As you'll see, the edit UV modifier is just a tool for adjusting where these UVs sit in two-dimensional UV mapping space. All right. The UV mapping data is just stored in the vertex point, much like its world position. All right, for each one of those. So that's the process. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now we've gone through and we've UV unwrapped a little fancy box. And so we can take an image of this and turn that in.